Hello and welcome to my Anagrams Art YouTube channel. This week I am going to show you a seascape in a panoramic form, which hopefully will be interesting because it's something new, and I think the subject matter and style really lends itself nicely to that shape of canvas. As per usual, please do like and subscribe and leave me a comment, but most importantly, please enjoy the video. So the important bit here is just making sure that with a panorama, you don't want the edges of the paintings to look like they don't need to be there, i.e. you don't want all the action to be in the middle and for the surrounding areas to look almost secondary. So what I'm doing now is just planning out the sky and where the light is going to come from and where the sky is going to extend to. And it's really, really important with the panoramic pieces, as I said, to make sure those edges are really, really playing an important part. And one of the ways to do this is to make sure that the edges of the paintings, the sides, have got a really, really intense colour to them, almost like the sunset is just sort of burning out to the sides. And that's why I've sort of started with some really, really deep pinks and oranges in those edge sections. And also, as I often talk about, I want the sunset to look like it is emanating from the centre, and gradually as it gets closer to the edges, getting a little bit darker and a little bit deeper and a bit heavier as well. So the purple I've used for the sky in the background, which you've just seen me do, is a really, really common colour I use, and my favourite palettes are probably the ones I'm using at the moment. And it just works really, really nicely as a colour that isn't too heavy, it's not too deep, it's not too dark, but it almost implies that there's something stormy going on maybe, that it's more than just a bright sunset, that there's a depth to the piece as well. So that's why I've used that really deep purple, and that's made from ultramarine, a little bit of Payne's grey, and also the magenta pink, which I've also used in the sky. So it's really, really important to keep those colours tonally in sync with each other, and the best way to do that is just make sure that when you're blending colours you're sticking to a fairly minimal palette. I mean, obviously you can introduce other colours if it looks good, but I do often stick to the same sort of base palette, and that includes the ultramarine, which I talk about a lot, the cerulean blue and the turquoise, and also the Nepal yellow and the magenta, which I've obviously mentioned quite a few times in my other videos. So another thing to be careful of when doing panoramas is that, because obviously the focus is the horizon line much more than it would be with a square piece, because you've got a lot going on in the corners and in the outskirts, because obviously it's square, a lot more focus is on the centre and the rocks. And to make them as interesting as I possibly can, I use a palette knife to go over certain areas and really embellish the tops and the tips of those rocks. So that includes kind of putting thick paint on the palette knife and just kind of gliding and sculpting into the top layer of the rock. And I do that closer to the surface of the sky and where it sort of meets the sky. And the reason I do this is to A, make it stand out, but B, also because it looks like the tops of the rocks are sort of more crumbly and they get less detailed as they go down, and just to show that intensity of texture as well. So you can see I've started what I like to call it's almost like a mirroring of the rocks just under the horizon line, and that is meant to be like a shore area, an area of just interest, you know, where the land sort of doesn't just stop directly, it sort of carries on going. Maybe there's some areas of grass, areas of beach, you know, just something additional to add interest. So I've done that by reflecting the same colours downwards. It also is important, as I often talk about, because it leads the eye into the centre of the piece, which is where the sunset is, and that's the focal point. So it's just an added extra line that's going to draw the eye in from the outskirts of the painting to the centre. Now, for balance purposes, really, and also just because, as I said, as we're getting further out of the painting, it's getting deeper and darker colours, so that bright white really stands out in the centre. But for balance purposes as well, I'm using the same colours I've used from the sky to mirror down to the edge of the painting, which is what I'm working on in the bottom right hand corner. And that's that same purple, the magentas, the cerulean blue, the ultramarine, and also some green I've added in too, just to give hints of sort of texture and foliage and things like that there's some kind of organic matter at the bottom there. But without adding those deep colours in the bottom corners, it almost doesn't balance out properly, because the centre is too prominent where the rocks are and the bright light doesn't stand out enough. So it's really, really important that those edge corners are complementing the rest of the piece, adding balance, and that's what I'm doing here by adding the colours and more textures and tones and things like that. I've made an almost brave decision here to add what you can see is almost like a, not quite lime green, but it is a very yellowy citrusy green. And this looks maybe a bit out of place at first, but it's almost complementing the red. It's the complementary colour to the deep red that I've used. So there is something there that works. And as I've said, I've played around with this colour palette a lot, as it's one of my favourites. So experience has taught me that can be really, really effective to use that red and contrast and complement it with the green as well. So that's why I've done that there. Now you can tell here I'm using my drippy technique as well, because those vertical lines are going to be absolutely fundamental, especially with the fact that this is such a horizontally dominated picture. It's in panorama, it's a very, very landscape focused picture, so those vertical lines are going to be really, really important. So I've used a lot of drips where I can, and that's going to create a balance and a harmony that's really, really important to balance out the piece. Otherwise it is just very focused on a landscape and almost doesn't quite work. You really, really need those lines. So the bottom left hand corner is one of the funnest bits to do of the painting, and that's because adding that texture is going to detract slightly from where there is a lot of focus in the centre and in the sunset itself, but it's also going to mirror the texture that I talked about at the beginning with the rocks and how I've built up that texture. So it's going to mirror that. It's going to bring your attention down to the bottom left hand corner. And it's going to add interest, and it's also because of the texture, it's going to look a little bit more 3D and also bring it more to the foreground in the way that we're looking at it, because that texture is going to really pop out and look like it's closer towards us. So I'm here just continuing to add those vertical accents, and the one really, really important one is that central one, which you can see I've added there, and it is the reflection from the sun, and it's really, really important in creating the harmony of the piece and the balance, because that really, really strong vertical accent right down the middle is going to take away from all those horizontal accents, and it's just going to create a lot more balance in the piece. It's really, really important. It's fundamental to the balance of the picture and just really, really adds something. It's also just a way of me to show the light as well, the light source and where it's coming from. And the way that I do that as well is I add a little bit of texture to that area. So I've used a palette knife and just created a long line of that bright white and yellow colour. You can see me adding here bits of detail in the background, which is going to bring vibrancy to the painting and look like something's going on in the background. There's, you know, boats and ships and sails and things happening along the horizon line. It also just breaks up what is quite a flat blend of colours with some real detail, and just cuts into that, the simplicity of the sky and the reflection as well. So it's really, really important. It adds so much to the piece, and it's really makes a difference to the overall feel of the painting as well. And the main thing that needs doing now is just adding texture to the piece, because I've built up the colours, I know the layout, I know everything works in terms of its colour scheme and in terms of its composition. I'm just adding texture to add interest and to just really build up the piece, and also flicking as well. You can see I love doing that, and that is just going to add a little bit of spray of light, a spray of colour, and also break up what is quite a flat skyline. It's going to really, really add, it's going to make it pop a little bit, and it almost looks like, you know, when you take a picture in the lens of the camera, you get that bright light that sort of almost emits out from the camera lens, and you get those little spots of light. It's almost meant to look like that as well. Now, as usual, I'm just doing basic touch-ups as well, just to make sure the piece works as a whole. Just adding little bits of sky. I'm slightly changing the composition of the sky to expand outwards a little bit, and there's the finished piece. So that was it. That was how I painted my Panoramic Seascape from start to finish. Please like and subscribe on your way out, and thank you for watching.